The animal had no scope to escape or avoid the shock. This pairing was repeated a number of times. Then the dogs were subjected to shock in an operant conditioning procedure. The dogs could escape the shock by pressing their heads against the wall. After having experienced inescapable shock in the Pavlovian contingency, the dog failed to escape or avoid shock in the operant conditioning procedure. The dog just suffered the shock through, and did not attempt to escape. This behavior of the dog was called learned helplessness. This phenomenon has been shown to be operative in humans also. It has been found that continuous failure in a set of tasks shows the occurrence of learned helplessness. In an experimental study, the subjects are initially given failure experience irrespective of their performance. In the second phase, the subjects are given a task. Learned helplessness is often measured in terms of the subject's ability and persistence before they give up the task. Continuous failure leads to little persistence and poor performance. This shows helplessness. There are numerous studies that demonstrate that persistent depression is often caused by learned helplessness. Activity 6.2. You can have first-hand experience of observational learning by doing the following exercise. Collect 4 or 5 school-going children and demonstrate how to make a boat out of a sheet of paper. Do it 2 or 3 times and ask the children to observe carefully. After having shown how to fold the paper in different ways for a number of times, give them sheets of paper and ask them to make a toy boat. Most children will be able to do it somewhat successfully. Table 6.6 Learning Styles. Relational style. Perceive information as part of total picture. Exhibit intuitive thinking. Learn materials that have a human, social content and are characterized by experiential, cultural relevance more easily. Have a good memory for verbally presented ideas and information, especially if relevant. Are more task-oriented concerning non-academic areas. Are influenced by authority figures' expression of confidence or doubt in students' ability. Prefer to withdraw from unstimulating task performance. Style conflicts with the traditional school environment. Analytical style. Able to discern information from total picture, focus on detail. Exhibit sequential and structured thinking. Learn materials that are inanimate and impersonal more easily. Have a good memory for abstract ideas and irrelevant information. Are more task-oriented concerning academics. Are not greatly affected by the opinions of others. Show ability to persist unstimulating task. Style matches most school environments. Review questions. What is learning? What are its distinguishing features? How does classical conditioning demonstrate learning by association? Define operant conditioning. Discuss the factors that influence the course of operant conditioning. A good role model is very important for a growing-up child. Discuss the kind of learning that supports it. Explain the procedures for studying verbal learning. What is a skill? What are the stages through which skill learning develops? How can you distinguish between generalization and discrimination? How does transfer of learning takes place? Why is motivation a prerequisite for learning? What does the notion of preparedness for learning mean? Explain the different forms of cognitive learning. How can we identify students with learning disabilities? Project ideas. How do your parents reinforce you for behaving in the ways they think are good for you? Select 5 different instances. Compare these with the reinforcement employed by teachers in the classroom and relate them to the concepts taught in the class. If your younger sister or brother has indulged in some undesirable behavior, how would you help her, him to get rid of that behavior? Make use of the learning principles discussed in the chapter. Chapter 7. Human Memory. After reading this chapter, you would be able to understand the nature of memory, distinguish between different types of memory, explain how the contents of long-term memory are represented and organized, appreciate the constructive and reconstructive processes in memory, understand the nature and causes of forgetting, and learn the strategies for improving memory. Contents. Introduction. Nature of memory. Information processing approach, the stage model. Memory systems, sensory, short-term and long-term memories. Working memory, Box 7.1. Levels of processing. Types of long-term memory. Declarative and procedural, episodic and semantic. Long-term memory classification, Box 7.2. Methods of memory measurement, Box 7.3. Knowledge representation and organization in memory. Memory making, eyewitness and false memories, Box 7.4. Memory as a constructive process. Nature and causes of forgetting. Forgetting due to trace decay, interference and retrieval failure. Repressed memories, Box 7.5. Enhancing memory. Mnemonics using images and organization. Key terms. Summary. Review questions. Project ideas. The advantage of bad memory is that one enjoys several times the same good things for the first time. Friedrich Nietzsche. Introduction. All of us are aware of the tricks that memory plays on us throughout our lives. Have you ever felt embarrassed because you could not remember the name of a known person you were talking to? Or anxious and helpless because everything you memorized well the previous day before taking your examination has suddenly become unavailable? Or felt excited because you can now flawlessly recite lines of a famous poem you had learned as a child? Memory indeed is a very fascinating yet intriguing human faculty. It functions to preserve our sense of who we are, maintains our interpersonal relationships and helps us in solving problems and taking decisions. Since memory is central to almost all cognitive processes such as perception, thinking and problem solving, psychologists have attempted to understand the manner in which any information is committed to memory, the mechanisms through which it is retained over a period of time, the reasons why it is lost from memory, and the techniques which can lead to memory improvement. In this chapter, we shall examine all these aspects of memory and understand various theories which explain the mechanisms of memory. The history of psychological research on memory spans over 100 years. The first systematic exploration of memory is credited to Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist of late 19th century, 1885. He carried out many experiments on himself and found that we do not forget the learned material at an even pace or completely. Initially the rate of forgetting is faster but eventually it stabilizes. Another view on memory was suggested by Frederick Bartlett, 1932, who contended that memory is not passive but an active process. With the help of meaningful verbal materials such as stories and texts, he demonstrated that memory is a constructive process. That is, what we memorize and store undergoes many changes and modifications over time. So there is a qualitative difference in what was initially memorized by us and what we retrieve or recall later. There are other psychologists who have influenced memory research in a major way. We shall review their contributions in this chapter at appropriate places. Nature of memory. Memory refers to retaining and recalling information over a period of time, depending upon the nature of cognitive task you are required to perform. It might be necessary to hold an information for a few seconds. For example, you use your memory to retain an unfamiliar telephone number till you have reached the telephone instrument to dial, or for many years you still remember the techniques of addition and subtraction which you perhaps learned during your early schooling. Memory is conceptualized as a process consisting of three independent, though interrelated stages. These are encoding, storage, and retrieval. Any information received by us necessarily goes through these stages. Encoding is the first stage, which refers to a process by which information is recorded and registered for the first time so that it becomes usable by our memory system. Whenever an external stimulus impinges on our sensory organs, it generates neural impulses. These are received in different areas of our brain for further processing. In encoding, incoming information is received, and some meaning is derived. It is then represented in a way so that it can be processed further. B. Storage is the second stage of memory. Information which was encoded must also be stored so that it can be put to use later. Storage, therefore, refers to the process through which information is retained in held over a period of time. C. Retrieval is the third stage of memory. Information can be used only when one is able to recover it from her, his memory. Retrieval refers to bringing the stored information to her, his awareness so that it can be used for performing various cognitive tasks such as problem solving or decision making. It may be interesting to note that memory failure can occur at any of these stages. You may fail to recall an information because you did not encode it properly, or the storage was weak, so you could not access or retrieve it when required. Information processing approach. The stage model. Initially, it was thought that memory is the capacity to store all information that we acquire through learning and experience. It was seen as a vast storehouse where all information that we knew was kept so that we could retrieve and use it as and when needed. But with the advent of the computer, human memory came to be seen as a system that processes information in the same way as a computer does. Both register, store, and manipulate large amount of information and act on the basis of the outcome of such manipulations. If you have worked on a computer, then you would know that it has a temporary memory, random access memory, or RAM, and a permanent memory, e.g., a hard disk. Based on the program commands, the computer manipulates the contents of its memories and displays the output on the screen. In the same way, human beings too register information, store and manipulate the stored information depending on the task that they need to perform. For example, when you are required to solve a mathematical problem, the memory relating to mathematical operations, such as division or subtraction, are carried out, activated and put to use, and receive the output, the problem solution. This analogy led to the development of the first model of memory, which was proposed by Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968. It is known as stage model. Memory systems, sensory, short-term, and long-term memories. According to the stage model, there are three memory systems: the sensory memory, the short-term memory, and the long-term memory. Each of these systems have different features and perform different functions with respect to the sensory inputs. See Figure 7.1. Let us examine what these systems are. Sensory memory. The incoming information first enters the sensory memory. Sensory memory has a large capacity. However, it is a very short duration, i.e., less than a second. It is a memory system that registers information from each of the senses with reasonable accuracy. Often this system is referred to as sensory memories or sensory registers because information from all the senses are registered here as exact replica of the stimulus. If you have experienced visual after images, the trail of light that stays after the bulb is switched off, or when you hear reverberations of a sound when the sound has ceased, then you are familiar with iconic, visual, or echoic, auditory, sensory registers. Short-term memory. You will perhaps agree that we do not attend to all the information that impinge on our senses. Information that is attended to enters the second memory store called the short-term memory, abbreviated as STM, which holds small amount of information for a brief period of time, usually for 30 seconds or less. Atkinson and Shiffrin propose that information in STM is primarily encoded acoustically, i.e. in terms of sound, and unless rehearsed continuously, it may get lost from the STM in less than 30 seconds. Note that the STM is fragile but not as fragile as sensory registers, where the information decays automatically in less than a second. Long-term memory. Materials that survive the capacity and duration limitations of the STM finally enter the long-term memory, abbreviated as LTM, which has a vast capacity. It is a permanent storehouse of all information that may be as recent as what you ate for breakfast yesterday to as distant as how you celebrated your 6th birthday. It has been shown that once any information enters the long-term memory store, it is never forgotten because it gets encoded semantically, i.e. in terms of the meaning that any information carries. What you experience as forgetting is in fact retrieval failure. For various reasons you cannot retrieve the stored information. You will read about retrieval-related forgetting later in this chapter. So far we have only discussed the structural features of the stage model. Questions which still remain to be addressed are how does information travel from one store to another and by what mechanisms it continues to stay in any particular memory store. Let us examine the answers to these questions. How does information travel from one store to another? As an answer to this question, Atkinson and Schifrin propose the notion of control processes which function to monitor the flow of information through various memory stores. As suggested earlier, all informations which our senses receive are not registered. If that be the case, imagine the kind of pressure that our memory system will have to cope with. Only that information which is attended to enters the STM from sensory registers, and in that sense, selective attention, as you have already read in Chapter 5, is the first control process that decides what will travel from sensory registers to STM. Sense impressions, which do not receive attention, fade away quickly. The STM then sets into motion another control process of maintenance rehearsal to retain the information for as much time as required. As the name suggests, these kinds of rehearsals simply maintain information through repetition, and when such repetitions discontinue, the information is lost. Another control process, which operates in STM to expand its capacity, is chunking. Through chunking it is possible to expand the capacity of STM, which is otherwise 7 plus 2. For example, if you are told to remember a string of digits such as 194,719,492,004, note that the number exceeds the capacity of STM. You may create the chunks as 1947, 1949, and 2004 and remember them as the year when India became independent, the year when the Indian Constitution was adopted, and the year when the tsunami hit the coastal regions of India and Southeast Asian countries. From the STM, information enters the long-term memory through elaborative rehearsals. As against maintenance rehearsals, which are carried through silent or vocal repetition, this rehearsal attempts to connect the to-be-retained information to the already existing information in long-term memory. For example, the task of remembering the meaning of the word humanity will be easier if the meanings of concepts such as compassion, truth, and benevolence are already in place. The number of associations you can create around the new information will determine its permanence. In elaborative rehearsals, one attempts to analyze the information in terms of various associations it arouses. It involves organization of the incoming information in as many ways as possible. You can expand the information in some kind of logical framework, link it to similar memories, or else can create a mental image. Figure 7.1, that presents the stage model of memory, also depicts the arrows to show the manner in which information travels from one stage to another. Experiments, which were carried out to test the stage model of memory, have produced mixed results. While some experiments unequivocally show that the STM and LTM are indeed two separate memory stores, other evidences have questioned their distinctiveness. For example, earlier it was shown that in the STM information is encoded acoustically, while in LTM it is encoded semantically, but later experimental evidences show that information can also be encoded semantically in STM and acoustically in LTM. Challis and Warrington in the year 1970 had cited the case of a man known as KF who met with an accident and damaged a portion of the left side of his cerebral hemisphere. Subsequently, it was found that his long-term memory was intact but the short-term memory was seriously affected. The stage model suggests that information are committed to the long-term memory via STM, and if KF's STM was affected, how can his long-term memory be normal? Several other studies have also shown that memory processes are similar irrespective of whether any information is retained for a few seconds or for many years, and that memory can be adequately understood without positing separate memory stores. All these evidences led to the development of another conceptualization about memory which is discussed below as the second model of memory. Levels of processing. The levels of processing view was proposed by Craik and Lockhart in 1972. This view suggests that the processing of any new information relates to the manner in which it is perceived, analyzed, and understood, which in turn determines the extent to which it will eventually be retained. Although this view has undergone many revisions since then, yet its basic idea remains the same. Let us examine this view in greater detail. Craik and Lockhart proposed that it is possible to analyze the incoming information at more than one level. One may analyze it in terms of its physical or structural features. For example, one might attend only to the shape of letters in a word, say cat, in spite of whether the word is written in capital or small letters or the color of the ink in which it is written. This is the first and the shallowest level of processing. At an intermediate level, one might consider and attend to the phonetic sounds that are attached to the letters, and therefore the structural features are transformed into at least one meaningful word, say, a word cat that has 3 specific letters. Analyzing information at these 2 levels produces memory that is fragile and is likely to decay rather quickly. However, there is a third and the deepest level at which information can be processed. In order to ensure that the information is retained for a longer period, it is important that it gets analyzed and understood in terms of its meaning. For instance, you may think of cat as an animal that has furs, has 4 legs, a tail, and is a mammal. You can also invoke an image of a cat and connect that image with your experiences. To sum up, analyzing information in terms of its structural and phonetic features amounts to shallower processing, while encoding it in terms of the meaning it carries, the semantic encoding, is the deepest processing level that leads to memory that resists forgetting considerably. Understanding memory as an outcome of the manner in which information is encoded initially has an important implication for learning. This view of memory will help you realize that while you are learning a new lesson, you must focus on elaborating the meaning of its contents in as much detail as possible and must not depend on rote memorization. Attempt this and you will soon realize that understanding the meaning of information and reflecting on how it relates to other facts, concepts, and your life experiences is a sure way to long-term retention. Types of long-term memory. As you have read in Box 7.1, the short-term memory is now seen as consisting of more than one component, working memory. In the same way, it is suggested that long-term memory too is not unitary because it contains a wide variety of information. In view of this, contemporary formulations envisage long-term memory as consisting of various types. For instance, one major classification within the LTM is that of declarative and procedural, sometimes called non-declarative, memories. All information pertaining to facts, names, dates, such as a rickshaw has 3 wheels, or that India became independent on August 15, 1947, or a frog is an amphibian, or you and your friend share the same name, are part of declarative memory. Procedural memory, on the other hand, refers to memories relating to procedures for accomplishing various tasks and skills, such as how to ride a bicycle, how to make tea, or play basketball. Facts retained in the declarative memory are amenable to verbal descriptions, while contents of procedural memory cannot be described easily. For example, when asked, you can describe how the game of cricket is played, but if someone asks you how do you ride a bicycle, you may find it difficult to narrate. Tulving has proposed yet another classification and has suggested that the declarative memory can either be episodic or semantic. Episodic memory contains biographical details of our lives. Memories relating to our personal life experiences constitute the episodic memory, and it is for this reason that its contents are generally emotional in nature. How did you feel when you stood first in your class? Or how angry was your friend and what did she or he say when you did not fulfill a promise? If such incidents did actually happen in your life, you perhaps will be able to answer these questions with reasonable accuracy. Although such experiences are hard to forget, yet it is equally true that many events take place continuously in our lives and that we do not remember all of them. Besides, there are painful and unpleasant experiences which are not remembered in as much detail as pleasant life experiences. Semantic memory, on the other hand, is the memory of general awareness and knowledge. All concepts, ideas, and rules of logic are stored in semantic memory. For instance, it is because of semantic memory that we remember the meaning of, say, nonviolence, or remember that 2 plus 6 equals 8, or the STD code of New Delhi is 011, or that the word elephant is misspelt. Unlike episodic memory, this kind of memory is not dated. You perhaps will not be able to tell when you learnt the meaning of nonviolence or on which date you came to know that Bangalore is the capital of Karnataka. Since the contents of semantic memory relate to facts and ideas of general awareness and knowledge, it is effect neutral and not susceptible to forgetting. See Box 7.2. For various other classifications of long-term memory. Activity 7.2. Think about your early school days. Write down 2 separate events that occurred during those days, and which you remember vividly. Use separate sheets for writing about each event. Think of the first month in class 11. Write down 2 separate events that occurred during the month, and which you remember vividly. Use separate sheets for each event. Compare these in terms of length, felt emotions, and coherence. Knowledge representation and organization in memory. In this section we will take a look at the organizational structure that the contents of long-term memory acquire over a period of time. Since long-term memory holds a very large amount of information which is put to use with amazing efficiency, it would be very useful to know how our memory system organizes its contents so that the right information is available at the right moment. It is important to note at this point that many ideas relating to organization of the content of long-term memory have resulted from experiments that have employed semantic retrieval tasks. You will perhaps agree that there cannot be any error in recalling the contents of semantic memory. For anyone who knows that birds fly will not make a mistake in answering a question, "Do birds fly?" The answer will be an affirmative. But people may take variable lengths of time in answering questions, which require semantic judgments. While responding to question, "Do birds fly?" a person will take not more than a second, but answering a question, "Are birds animals?" may take longer. Depending upon how much time people take in responding to questions such as these, the nature of organization in long-term memory has been inferred. The most important unit of representation of knowledge in long-term memory is a concept. Concepts are mental categories for objects and events, which are similar to each other in one or in more than one way. Concepts once formed get organized in categories. A category itself is a concept, but it also functions to organize similarities among other concepts based on common features. For example, the word mango is a category because different varieties of mangoes can be subsumed within it, and it is also a concept within the category of fruit. Concepts may also get organized in schema. They are mental frameworks which represent our knowledge and assumptions about the world. For example, think of a schema of a drawing room. It will have different objects, things, like a sofa set, center table, paintings, etc., which are found in a drawing room and where they are found in the drawing room. So far we have examined the concept as the basic level at which knowledge is represented in the long-term memory, and the notions of category and schema as the first level at which concepts are organized. Let us now look at a higher level of organization that concepts acquire in the long-term memory. In the year 1969, Alan Collins and Ross Quillian published a landmark research paper in which they suggested that knowledge in long-term memory is organized hierarchically and assumes a network structure. Elements of this structure are called nodes. Nodes are concepts, while connections between nodes are labeled relationships, which indicate category membership or concept attributes. In order to verify the proposed network structure of long-term knowledge, participants of experiments were asked to verify the truth of the statements such as "canary is a bird," or "a canary is an animal." Answer was in yes, no. These were generally class inclusion statements in which the subject was word canary, perhaps, you know, it is a bird, and the predicate took the form is a. A critical finding of such experiments was that as the predicate became hierarchically more remote from the subject in a sentence, participants took longer time to verify that it is true or false. Thus, people took longer to verify that a canary is an animal compared to that which said, canary is a bird, because bird is an immediate superordinate category in which canary is subsumed, while animal is a superordinate category which is more distant and remote from the concept canary. According to this view, we can store all knowledge at a certain level that applies to all the members of a category without having to repeat that information at the lower levels in the hierarchy. This ensures a high degree of cognitive economy, which means maximum and efficient use of the capacity of long-term memory with minimum redundancy. So far we have discussed concept as unit of representation of knowledge in the long-term memory and looked at various ways in which concepts get organized. Does this mean that knowledge is encoded only in word-like format, or can there be other ways of encoding? It has been shown that information can be coded in a perceptual format or in terms of images. An image is a concrete form of representation which directly conveys the perceptual attributes of an object. If you were to come across the word school, an image of your own school will get generated. In fact, almost all concrete objects and concepts generate images, and the knowledge related to them is encoded both verbally as well as visually. This is known as dual coding hypothesis, originally proposed by Pavio. According to this hypothesis, concrete nouns and information related to concrete objects are encoded and stored in the form of images, while information related to abstract concepts assume a verbal and a descriptive code. For example, if you are asked to describe a bird, the first thing that happens is that an image of a bird is generated, and based on this image, you describe a bird. But, on the other hand, the meanings of concepts like truth or honesty will not have such accompanying images. So, any information which has been encoded verbally as well as in the form of images is recalled with greater ease. Information which has been encoded and stored in the form of images leads to the development of mental models. There are many routine tasks which require mental models. For example, following a road direction, assembling a bicycle, or even preparing to cook an exotic dish from instructions given in a cookery book require that spatial mental models are created from verbal descriptions. Mental models, therefore, refer to our belief about the manner in which our environment is structured, and such beliefs are formed with the help of concrete images as well as verbal descriptions. Memory as a constructive process. If you were to carefully examine the initial explorations about memory processes, you will perhaps conclude that memory primarily consists of reproduction of stored materials. This view was held by Ebbinghaus and his followers, who emphasized the quantity of information that can be stored in the memory and judged its accuracy by matching the contents of storage and reproduction. If the reproduced version of the stored material showed any deviation, it was seen as an error and a case of memory failure. This storage metaphor of memory implied that the memory was a passive occurrence of learned material that has been transported to its long-term storehouse. This position was challenged by Bartlett in the early 30s, who contended that memory is an active process and all that we have stored undergoes continuous change and modification. What we memorize is influenced by the meaning we assign to the stimulus material, and once it is committed to our memory system, it cannot remain in isolation from other cognitive processes. In essence, therefore, Bartlett saw memory as a constructive and not a reproductive process. Using meaningful materials such as texts, folk tales, fables, etc., Bartlett attempted to understand the manner in which content of any specific memory gets affected by a person's knowledge, goals, motivation, preferences, and various other psychological processes. He conducted simple experiments in which reading of such stimulus materials was followed by 15 minutes break, and then the participants of his experiment recalled what they had read. Bartlett used the method of serial reproduction, in which the participants of his experiments recalled the memory materials repeatedly at varying time intervals. While engaging in serial reproduction of learned material, his participants committed a wide variety of errors, which Bartlett considered useful in understanding the process of memory construction. His participants altered the texts to make them more consistent with their knowledge, glossed over the unnecessary details, elaborated the main theme, and transformed the material to look more coherent and rational. In order to explain such findings, Bartlett invoked the term schema, which according to him, was an active organization of past reactions and past experiences. Schemas refer to an organization of past experiences and knowledge, which influence the way in which incoming information is interpreted, stored, and later retrieved. Memory, therefore, becomes an active process of construction where information is encoded and stored in terms of a person's understanding and within his previous knowledge and expectations. Nature and causes of forgetting. Each one of us has experienced forgetting and its consequences almost routinely. Why do we forget? Is it because the information we commit to our long-term memory is somehow lost? Is it because we did not memorize it well enough? Is it because we did not encode the information correctly, or is it because during storage, it got distorted or misplaced? Many theories have been forwarded to explain forgetting, and now you will read about those that seem plausible and have received considerable attention. The first systematic attempt to understand the nature of forgetting was made by Hermann Ebbinghaus, who memorized lists of nonsense syllables, CVC trigrams such as knock or sep, etc., and then measured the number of trials he took to relearn the same list at varying time intervals. He observed that the course of forgetting follows a certain pattern, which you can see in Figure 7.3. As the figure indicates, the rate of forgetting is maximum in the first 9 hours, particularly during the first hour. After that, the rate slows down and not much is forgotten even after many days. Although Ebbinghaus's experiments constituted initial explorations and were not very sophisticated yet, they have influenced memory research in many important ways. It is now upheld, almost unanimously, that there is always a sharp drop in memory and thereafter the decline is very gradual. Let us now examine the main theories which have been advanced to explain forgetting. Forgetting due to trace decay. Trace decay, also called disuse theory, is the earliest theory of forgetting. The assumption here is that memory leads to modification in the central nervous system, which is akin to physical changes in the brain called memory traces. When these memory traces are not used for a long time, they simply fade away and become unavailable. This theory has been proved inadequate on several grounds. If forgetting takes place because memory traces decay due to disuse, then people who go to sleep after memorizing should forget more compared to those who remain awake, simply because there is no way in which memory traces can be put to use during sleep. Results, however, show just the opposite. Those who remain awake after memorizing, waking condition, show greater forgetting than those who sleep, sleeping condition. Because trace decay theory did not explain forgetting adequately, it was soon replaced by another theory of forgetting which suggested that new information that enters the long-term memory interferes with the recall of earlier memories, and therefore, interference is the main cause of forgetting. Forgetting due to interference. If forgetting is not due to trace decay, then why does it take place? A theory of forgetting that has perhaps been the most influential one is the interference theory, which suggests that forgetting is due to interference between various information that the memory store contains. This theory assumes that learning and memorizing involve forming of associations between items, and once acquired, these associations remain intact in the memory. People keep acquiring numerous such associations, and each of these rests independently without any mutual conflict. However, interference comes about at a time of retrieval when these various sets of associations compete with each other for retrieval. This interference process will become clearer with a simple exercise. Request your friend to learn 2 separate lists of nonsense syllables, list A and list B, one after the other, and after a while ask him to recall the nonsense syllables of list A. If while trying to recall the items of list A, she or he recalls some of the items of list B, it is because of the association formed while learning list B are interfering with the earlier association which were formed while learning list A. There are at least 2 kinds of interferences that may result in forgetting. Interference can be proactive forward-moving, which means what you have learned earlier interferes with the recall of your subsequent learning, or retroactive backward-moving, which refers to difficulty in recalling what you have learned earlier because of learning a new material. In other words, in proactive interference, past learning interferes with the recall of later learning, while in retroactive interference the later learning interferes with the recall of past learning. For example, if you know English and you find it difficult to learn French, it is because of proactive interference, and if, on the other hand, you cannot recall English equivalents of French words that you are currently memorizing, then it is an example of retroactive interference. A typical experimental design that is used to demonstrate proactive and retroactive interference has been presented in Table 7.1. Forgetting due to retrieval failure. Forgetting can occur not only because the memory traces have decayed over time, as suggested by the disuse theory, or because independent sets of stored associations compete at the time of recall, as suggested by the interference theory, but also because at the time of recall, either the retrieval cues are absent or they are inappropriate. Retrieval cues are aids which help us in recovering information stored in the memory. This view was advanced by Tulving and his associates, who carried out several experiments to show that contents of memory may become inaccessible either due to absence or inappropriateness of retrieval cues that are available, employed at the time of recall. Let us understand this with the help of an example. Suppose you have memorized a list of meaningful words like hut, wasp, cottage, gold, bronze, ant, etc., in which words belong to 6 categories, like places of living, names of insects, types of metal, etc. If after a while you are asked to recall those, you may recall a couple of them, but if during the second recall attempt, you are also provided with category names, then you may find that your recall is near total. Category names in this example act as retrieval cues. Besides category names, the physical context in which you learn also provides effective retrieval cues. Enhancing memory. All of us desire to possess an excellent memory system that is robust and dependable. Who, after all, likes to face situations of memory failures that lead to so much of anxiety and embarrassment? After learning about various memory-related processes, you certainly would like to know how your memory can be improved. There are a number of strategies for improving memory called mnemonics, pronounced mnemonics, to help you improve your memory. Some of these mnemonics involve use of images, whereas others emphasize self-induced organization of learned information. You will now read about mnemonics and some suggestions given for memory improvement. Mnemonics using images. Mnemonics using images require that you create vivid and interacting images of and around the material you wish to remember. The 2 prominent mnemonic devices, which make interesting use of images, are the keyword method and the method of loci. The keyword method. Suppose you want to learn words of any foreign language. In keyword method, an English word, the assumption here is that you know English language that sounds similar to the word of a foreign language is identified. This English word will function as the keyword. For example, if you want to remember the Spanish word for duck, which is pato, you may choose pot as the keyword and then evoke images of keyword and the target word, the Spanish word you want to remember, and imagine them as interacting. You might, in this case, imagine a duck in a pot full of water. This method of learning words of a foreign language is much superior compared to any kind of rote memorization. The method of loci. In order to use the method of loci, items you want to remember are placed as objects arranged in a physical space in the form of visual images. This method is particularly helpful in remembering items in a serial order. It requires that you first visualize objects, places that you know well, in a specific sequence. Imagine the objects you want to remember and associate them one by one to the physical locations. For example, suppose you want to remember bread, eggs, tomatoes, and soap on your way to the market. You may visualize a loaf of bread and eggs placed in your kitchen, tomatoes kept on a table, and soap in the bathroom. When you enter the market, all you need to do is to take a mental walk along the route from your kitchen to the bathroom, recalling all the items of your shopping list in a sequence. Mnemonics using organization. Organization refers to imposing certain order on the material you want to remember. Mnemonics of this kind are helpful because of the framework you create, while organization makes the retrieval task fairly easy. Chunking. While describing the features of short-term memory, we noted how chunking can increase the capacity of short-term memory. In chunking, several smaller units are combined to form large chunks. For creating chunks, it is important to discover some organization principles, which can link smaller units. Therefore, apart from being a control mechanism to increase the capacity of short-term memory, chunking can be used to improve memory as well. First letter technique. In order to employ the first letter technique, you need to pick up the first letter of each word you want to remember and arrange them to form another word or a sentence. For example, colors of a rainbow are remembered in this way: Vibgyor, that stands for violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange and red. Mnemonic strategies for memory enhancement are too simplistic and perhaps underestimate complexities of memory tasks and difficulties people experience while memorizing. In place of mnemonics, a more comprehensive approach to memory improvement has been suggested by many psychologists. In such an approach, emphasis is laid on applying knowledge about memory processes to the task of memory improvement. Let us examine some of these suggestions. It is suggested that one must engage in deep-level processing. If you want to memorize any information well, engage in deep-level processing. Craik and Lockhart have demonstrated that processing information in terms of meaning that they convey leads to better memory as compared to attending to their surface features. Deep processing would involve asking as many questions related to the information as possible, considering its meaning and examining its relationships to the facts you already know. In this way, the new information will become a part of your existing knowledge framework and the chances that it will be remembered are increased. Minimize interference. Interference, as we have read, is a major cause of forgetting, and therefore you should try to avoid it as much as possible. You know that maximum interference is caused when very similar materials are learned in a sequence. Avoid this. Arrange your study in such a way that you do not learn similar subjects one after the other. Instead, pick up some other subject unrelated to the previous one. If that is not possible, distribute your learning. Practice. This means giving yourself intermittent rest periods while studying to minimize interference. Give yourself enough retrieval cues. While you learn something, think of retrieval cues inherent in your study material. Identify them and link parts of the study material to these cues. Cues will be easier to remember compared to the entire content, and the links you have created between cues and the content will facilitate the retrieval process. Thomas and Robinson have developed another strategy to help students in remembering more, which they called the methods of PQRST. This acronym stands for preview, question, read, self-recitation, and test. Preview refers to giving a cursory look at the chapter and familiarizing oneself with its contents. Question means raising questions and seeking answers from the lesson. Now start reading and look for answers of questions you had raised. After reading, try to rewrite what you have read, and at the end test how much you have been able to understand. At the end, a note of caution must be sounded. There is no one method that can solve all problems related to retention and bring about an overnight memory improvement. In order to improve your memory, you need to attend to a wide variety of factors which affect your memory, such as your health status, your interest and motivation, your familiarity with the subject matter, and so on. In addition, you must learn to use strategies for memory improvement depending upon the nature of memory tasks you are required to accomplish. Key terms: chunking, cognitive economy, concepts, control process, dual coding, echoic memory, encoding, episodic memory, elaborative rehearsals, fugue state, information processing approach, maintenance rehearsals, memory making, mnemonics, schema, semantic memory, serial reproduction, working memory. Summary: memory is seen as consisting of three interrelated processes of encoding, storage and retrieval. While encoding is registering the incoming information in a way that it becomes compatible to the memory system, storage and retrieval refers to holding the information over a period of time and bringing the information back to one's awareness, respectively. The stage model of memory compares memory processes with the working of a computer and suggests that incoming information is processed through three distinct stages of sensory memory, short-term memory and long-term memory. Levels of processing view of memory contends that the information can be encoded at any of the three levels, namely, the structural, the phonetic and the semantic. If an information is analyzed and encoded semantically, which is the deepest level of processing, then it leads to better retention. Long-term memory has been classified in many ways. One major classification is that of declarative and procedural memory, and another is that of episodic and semantic memory. Contents of long-term memory get represented in terms of concepts, categories and images and are organized hierarchically. Forgetting refers to loss of stored information over a period of time. After a material is learnt, there is a sharp drop in its memory and then the decline is very gradual. Forgetting has been explained as resulting from trace decay and interference. It may also be caused due to absence of appropriate cues at the time of retrieval. Memory is not only a reproductive but also a constructive process. What we store undergoes change and modification within one's past knowledge and schema. Mnemonics are strategies for improving memory. While some mnemonics use images, others emphasize organization of the learned material. Box 6.1 Classical and Operant Conditioning – Differences. In classical conditioning, the responses are under the control of some stimulus because they are reflexes, automatically elicited by the appropriate stimuli. Such stimuli are selected as US and responses elicited by them as ER. Thus Pavlovian conditioning, in which US elicits responses, is often called respondent conditioning. In instrumental conditioning, responses are under the control of the organism and are voluntary responses or operants. Thus, in the two forms of conditioning, different types of responses are conditioned. In classical conditioning, the CS and US are well defined, but in operant conditioning, CS is not defined. It can be inferred but is not directly known. In classical conditioning, the experimenter controls the occurrence of US, while in operant conditioning the occurrence of the reinforcer is under the control of the organism that is learning. Thus, for US in classical conditioning the organism remains passive, while in operant conditioning the subject has to be active in order to be reinforced. In the two forms of conditioning, the technical terms used to characterize the experimental proceedings are different. Moreover, what is called reinforcer in operant conditioning is called US in classical conditioning. An US has two functions. In the beginning it elicits the response and also reinforces the response to be associated and elicited later on by the CS. Box 6.2 Learned helplessness. It is an interesting phenomenon, which is a result of an interaction between the two forms of conditioning. Learned helplessness underlies psychological cases of depression. Seligman and Mayer demonstrated this phenomenon in a study on dogs. First, they subjected dogs to sound, CS, and electric shock, US, using classical conditioning procedure. The animal had no scope to escape or avoid the shock. This pairing was repeated a number of times. Then the dogs were subjected to shock in an operant conditioning procedure. The dogs could escape the shock by pressing their heads against the wall. After having experienced inescapable shock in the Pavlovian contingency, the dog failed to escape or avoid shock in the operant conditioning procedure. The dog just suffered the shock through, and did not attempt to escape. This behavior of the dog was called learned helplessness. This phenomenon has been shown to be operative in humans also. It has been found that continuous failure in a set of tasks shows the occurrence of learned helplessness. In an experimental study, the subjects are initially given failure experience irrespective of their performance. In the second phase, the subjects are given a task. Learned helplessness is often measured in terms of the subject's ability and persistence before they give up the task. Continuous failure leads to little persistence and poor performance. This shows helplessness. There are numerous studies that demonstrate that persistent depression is often caused by learned helplessness. Box 7.1 Working memory. In recent years, psychologists have suggested that the short-term memory is not unitary, rather it may consist of many components. This multi-component view of short-term memory was first proposed by Baddeley, 1986, who suggested that the short-term memory is not a passive storehouse but rather a workbench that holds a wide variety of memory materials that are constantly handled, manipulated and transformed as people perform various cognitive tasks. This workbench is called the working memory. The first component of the working memory is the phonological loop, which holds a limited number of sounds and unless rehearsed they decay within 2 seconds. The second component, visual spatial sketchpad, stores visual and spatial information, and like phonological loop the capacity of the sketchpad too is limited. The third component, which Baddeley calls the central executive, organizes information from phonological loop, visual spatial sketchpad as well as from the long-term memory. Like a true executive, it allocates attentional resources to be distributed to various information needed to perform a given cognitive operation and monitors, plans, and controls behavior. Box 7.2 Long-term memory classification. The study of memory is a fascinating field and researchers have reported many new phenomena. The following phenomena show the complex and dynamic nature of human memory. Flashbulb memories. These are memories of events that are very arousing or surprising. Such memories are very detailed. They are like a photo taken with an advanced model camera. You can push the button, and after 1 minute you have a recreation of the scene. You can look at the photograph whenever you want. Flashbulb memories are like images frozen in memory and tied to particular places, dates, and times. Perhaps, people put in greater effort in the formation of these memories, and highlighting details might lead to deeper levels of processing as well as offer more cues for retrieval. Autobiographical memory. These are personal memories. They are not distributed evenly throughout our lives. Some periods in our lives produce more memories than others. For instance, no memories are reported pertaining to early childhood, particularly during the first 4 to 5 years. This is called childhood amnesia. There is a dramatic increase in the frequency of memories just after early adulthood, i.e. in the 20s. Perhaps emotionality, novelty, and importance of events contribute to it. During old age, the most recent years of life are likely to be well remembered. However, before this, around 30 years of age, decline in certain kinds of memory starts. Implicit memory. Recent studies have indicated that many of the memories remain outside the conscious awareness of a person. Implicit memory is a kind of memory that a person is not aware of. It is a memory that is retrieved automatically. One interesting example of implicit memory comes from the experience of typing. If someone knows typing, that means she or he also knows the particular letters on the keyboard. But many typists cannot correctly label blank keys in a drawing of a keyboard. Implicit memories lie outside the boundaries of awareness. In other words, we are not conscious of the fact that a memory or record of a given experience exists. Nevertheless, implicit memories do influence our behavior. This kind of memory was found in patients suffering from brain injuries. They were presented a list of common words. A few minutes later, the patient was asked to recall words from the list. No memory was shown for the words. However, if she or he was prompted to say a word that begins with these letters and 2 letters are given, the patient was able to recall words. Implicit memories are also observed in people with normal memories. Box 7.3 Methods of memory measurement. There are many ways in which memory is measured experimentally. Since there are many kinds of memories, any method appropriate for studying one type of memory may not be suited for studying another. The major methods which are used for memory measurement are being presented here. Free recall and recognition. For measuring facts, episodes related memory. In free recall method, participants are presented with some words which they are asked to memorize, and after some time they are asked to recall them in any order. The more they are able to recall, the better their memory is. In recognition, instead of being asked to generate items, participants see the items that they had memorized along with distractor items, those that they had not seen, and their task is to recognize which one of those they had learned. The greater the number of recognition of old items, better is the memory. Sentence verification task. For measuring semantic memory, as you have already read. Semantic memory is not amenable to any forgetting because it embodies general knowledge that we all possess. In sentence verification task, the participants are asked to indicate whether the given sentences are true or false. Faster the participants respond, better retained is the information needed to verify those sentences. See Activity 7.3 for use of this task in measurement of semantic knowledge. Priming. For measuring information we cannot report verbally, we store many kinds of information that we can't report verbally, for instance, information necessary to ride a bicycle or play a sitar. Besides, we also store information that we are not aware of, which is described as implicit memory. In priming method, participants are shown a list of words, such as garden, playground, house, etc. And then they are shown parts of these words like gar, pla, ho, along with parts of other words they had not seen. Participants complete parts of seen words more quickly than parts of words they had not seen. When asked, they are often unaware of this and report that they have only guessed. Box 7.4 Memory Making, Eyewitness and False Memories. Eyewitness memory. Court procedures followed in criminal trials use the testimony given by the eyewitness of the offense. It is considered to be the most reliable evidence for or against the accused. Some experiments carried out by Loftus and her colleagues during the mid-70s showed that the eyewitness's memory is susceptible to many flaws. The experimental procedure followed by Loftus was very simple. A film clipping of an event, usually a car accident, was shown to the participants. This was followed by some questions, which interferes with encoding of the event. One of the questions was, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? In another question the verb smashed was replaced with the verb contacted. Those who were asked the first question, which included the word smashed, estimated the speed of the cars as 40.8 miles per hour. Those who were given the second question, i.e. with the word contacted, estimated that the speed of the cars was only 31.8 miles per hour. Clearly, the nature of leading questions changed the memory. In fact, the encoding of the event was overridden by misleading questions. Some of these errors are also committed because of effective nature of the event itself. For example, events depicting violence or a tragedy tend to arouse strong emotions, the eyewitnesses get overwhelmed and do not pay attention to details while encoding. False memory. An interesting phenomenon called false memory can be induced by powerful imagination of events that did not take place at all. Surprised? Let us look at one such study carried out by Gary, Manning and Loftus in 1996 and understand the features of false memory. Initially they presented before the participants of their experiments a list of events that could have occurred in their lives. In the first phase of this experiment, they rated the likelihood that each of these events actually took place in their lives to the best of their childhood memories. 2 weeks later, they were invited again to the laboratory and were asked to imagine those events and visualize as if they actually happened to them. In particular, events which were rated low in terms of their likelihood of occurrence were chosen for the task of visualizing and imagining. This was the second phase of the experiment. Finally, in the third phase, the experimenters pretended that they had misplaced the event likelihood ratings which they had obtained during the first phase and therefore requested the participants to respond to the list, once again. Interestingly, events which were rated low on likelihood in the first phase but were later visualized and imagined as real were now rated high. The participants reported that those events actually took place in their lives. These findings suggest that memory can be induced and implanted through imagination inflation, a finding that provides useful insights into memory processes. Box 7.5 Repressed memories. Some individuals undergo experiences that are traumatic. A traumatic experience emotionally hurts a person. Sigmund Freud posited that such experiences are repressed into the unconscious and are not available for retrieval from memory. It is a kind of repression. Painful, threatening, and embarrassing memories are held out of consciousness. In some persons, traumatic experiences may give rise to psychological amnesia. Some individuals experience crisis, and are utterly incapable of coping with such events. They close their eyes, ears and mind to such harsh realities of life, and take mental flight from them. It results in highly generalized amnesia. One of the results of such flights is the emergence of a disorder known as fugue state. Persons who become victims of such a state assume a new identity, name, address, etc. They have two personalities and one knows nothing about the other. Forgetfulness or loss of memory under stress and high anxiety is not uncommon. Many hard-working and ambitious students aspire for high scores in final examinations, and to achieve such ends they put in long hours in studies. But when they receive the question paper, they become extremely nervous and forget everything they had prepared well. Activity 6.2. You can have first-hand experience of observational learning by doing the following exercise. Collect 4 or 5 school-going children and demonstrate how to make a boat out of a sheet of paper. Do it 2 or 3 times and ask the children to observe carefully. After having shown how to fold the paper in different ways for a number of times, give them sheets of paper and ask them to make a toy boat. Most children will be able to do it somewhat successfully. Activity 7.1. Try to remember the following list of digits, individual digits. 19,254,981,121. Now try to memorize them in the following groups. 19,254,981,121. Finally memorize them in the following manner. 12325272929112. What difference do you observe? Read out the lists given below in a row at the speed of 1 digit per second to your friend and ask him to repeat all the digits in the same order. List. Digits. 1. 6 digits. 2. 6 3 8 3 4. 2. 7 digits. 7 4 8 2 4 1 2. 3. 8 digits. 4 3 7 2 9 0 3 6. 4. 10 digits. 9 2 4 1 7 8 2 6 5 3. 5. 12 digits. 8 2 5 4 7 4 7 7 3 9 1 6. Remember that your friend will recall the digits as soon as you finish the list. Note how many digits are recalled. The memory score of your friend will be the number of digits correctly recalled by him. Discuss your findings with your classmates and teacher. Table 6.6 Learning Styles. Relational style. Perceive information as part of total picture. Exhibit intuitive thinking. Learn materials that have a human, social content and are characterized by experiential, cultural relevance more easily. Have a good memory for verbally presented ideas and information, especially if relevant. Are more task-oriented concerning non-academic areas. Are influenced by authority figures' expression of confidence or doubt in students' ability. Prefer to withdraw from unstimulating task performance. Style conflicts with the traditional school environment. Analytical style. Able to dissemble information from total picture, focus on detail. Exhibit sequential and structured thinking. Learn materials that are inanimate and impersonal more easily. Have a good memory for abstract ideas and irrelevant information. Are more task-oriented concerning academics. Are not greatly affected by the opinions of others. Show ability to persist unstimulating task. Style matches most school environments. Activity 7.4. Given below are 2 lists of words. First, memorize the list in such a way that you are able to recall the words without any error. Now you take up the second list and memorize it to the criterion of correct recall error. Forget about the list and read something else for an hour. Now recall the words in the first list and write them down. Note the total number of words correctly recalled and the number of words incorrectly recalled. List 1. Goat. Sheep. Leopard. Jackal. Monkey. Camel. Mule. Deer. Squirrel. Horse. Cheetah. Wolf. Snake. Rabbit. Parrot. List 2. Pig. Elephant. Donkey. Pigeon. Cobra. Tiger. Myna. Lion. Calf. Bears. Fox. Crow. Buffalo. Mouse. Get the cooperation of one of your friends and request him to memorize the words of list 1 to the criterion as stated above. Request him to sing a song and have a cup of tea with you. Keep him engaged in some conversation for an hour or so. Then request him to write down the words she or he had memorized earlier. Compare your recall with the one made by your friend. Review questions. What is the meaning of the terms encoding, storage, and retrieval? How is information processed through sensory, short-term and long-term memory systems? How are maintenance rehearsals different from elaborative rehearsals? Differentiate between declarative and procedural memories. Describe the hierarchical organization in long-term memory. Why does forgetting take place? How is retrieval-related forgetting different from forgetting due to interference? What evidence do we have to say that memory is a constructive process? Define mnemonics. Suggest a plan to improve your own memory. Project ideas. Recall and write down an event of your life that you remember very clearly. Also request others, those who were participants of that event, such as your brother, sister, parents, or other relatives, friends, to do the same. Compare the two recalled versions and look for discrepancies and similarities. Try to reason why there are similarities and discrepancies. Narrate a story to your friend and ask her, him to write it down after an hour. Also request her, him to narrate what she or he had written to another person. Continue this process till you have at least 5 versions of the original story. Compare the various versions and identify constructive processes in memory. Chapter 8. Thinking. After reading this chapter, you would be able to describe the nature of thinking and reasoning, demonstrate an understanding of some cognitive processes involved in problem solving and decision making, understand the nature and process of creative thinking and learn ways of enhancing it, understand the relationship between language and thought, and describe the process of language development and its use. Contents. Introduction. Nature of thinking. Building blocks of thought. Culture and thinking, Box 8.1. The processes of thinking. Problem solving. Reasoning. Decision making. Nature and process of creative thinking. Nature of creative thinking. Lateral thinking, Box 8.2. Process of creative thinking. Developing creative thinking. Barriers to creative thinking. Strategies for creative thinking. Thought and language. Development of language and language use. Bilingualism and multilingualism, Box 8.3. Key terms. Summary. Review questions. Project ideas. But whatever the process, the result is wonderful. Gradually, from naming an object, we advance step by step until we have traversed the vast difference between our first stammered syllable and the sweep of thought in a line of Shakespeare. Helen Keller. Introduction. Think for a moment, how many times and in what ways you are using the word think in your day-to-day conversations. Sometimes probably, you use it as a synonym to remember, I can't think of her name, pay attention, think about it, or convey uncertainty, I think today my friend will visit me. Think has a wide range of meanings which cover a number of psychological processes. However, in psychology, thinking is a core subject area with an independent existence and a meaning of its own. In this chapter, we will discuss thinking as a mental activity directed at solving a problem, making inferences, judging certain facts, and deciding and choosing between options. Further, the nature and characteristics of creative thinking, what it involves and how it can be developed will also be discussed. Have you ever seen a small child building a tower with blocks or sand? The child would build a tower, dismantle it, make another one, and so on and so forth. While doing this, the child sometimes talks to herself or himself. The speech would primarily include the steps she or he is following or want to follow, not this, a little small, a tree at the back, evaluation of the design, nice. You also might have experience talking to yourself while solving a problem. Why do we talk while we think? What is the relationship between language and thought? In this chapter, we shall also be discussing the development of language and the relationship between language and thought. Before starting our discussion on thinking, it is necessary to discuss thinking as the base of human cognition. Nature of thinking. Thinking is the base of all cognitive activities or processes and is unique to human beings. It involves manipulation and analysis of information received from the environment. For example, while seeing a painting, you are not simply focusing on the color of the painting or the lines and strokes, rather you are going beyond the given text and interpreting its meaning, and you are trying to relate the information to your existing knowledge. Understanding of the painting involves creation of new meaning that is added to your knowledge. Thinking, therefore, is a higher mental process through which we manipulate and analyze the acquired or existing information. Such manipulation and analysis occur by means of abstracting, reasoning, imagining, problem-solving, judging, and decision-making. Thinking is mostly organized and goal-directed. All day-to-day activities, ranging from cooking to solving a math problem, have a goal. One desires to reach the goal by planning, recalling the steps that one has already followed in the past if the task is familiar, or inferring strategies if the task is new. Thinking is an internal mental process, which can be inferred from overt behavior. If you see a chess player engrossed in thinking for several minutes before making a move, you cannot observe what he is thinking. You can simply infer what he was thinking or what strategies he was trying to evaluate from his next move. Building blocks of thought. We already know that thinking relies on knowledge we already possess. Such knowledge is represented either in the form of mental images or words. People usually think by means of mental images or words. Suppose you are traveling by road to reach a place which you had visited long back. You would try to use the visual representation of the street and other places. On the other hand, when you want to buy a storybook, your choice would depend upon your knowledge about different authors, themes, etc. Here, your thinking is based on words or concepts. We shall first discuss mental image and then move on to concepts as the base of human thought. Mental image. Suppose I ask you to imagine a cat sitting on a tree with its tail slightly raised and curved. You would most likely try to form a visual image of the whole situation, something similar to what the girl in the picture is doing, figure 8.1. Or think of another situation where you are asked to imagine yourself standing in front of the Taj Mahal and describe what you see. While doing this, you are actually forming a visual image of the event. You are probably trying to see through your mind's eye, just like the way you would see a picture. Why is it useful to draw a map while giving directions to someone? Try to remember your earlier experience in reading a map, remembering the different places and subsequently locating them in a physical map in your examination. In doing this, you were mostly forming and using mental images. An image is a mental representation of a sensory experience. It can be used to think about things, places, and events. You can try out Activity 8.1, which demonstrates how images are formed. Activity 8.1. Give a map, like the following in figure 8.28, to your friend to observe for 2 minutes and tell him that later on she or he will be asked to locate the marked places in a blank map. Then present a map, like the one in figure 8.2b, with no indications of the different places. Ask your friend to locate the places she or he has seen in the first map. Then ask how she or he was able to locate the places. She or he will probably be able to tell you the way she or he formed an image of the whole situation. Concepts. How do you know that a lion is not a bird but a parrot is? You have already read this in Chapter 7. Whenever we come across an object or event familiar or unfamiliar, we try to identify the object or event by extracting its characteristics, matching it with the already existing category of objects and events. For example, when we see an apple, we categorize it as fruit. When we see a table, we categorize it as furniture. When we see a dog, we categorize it as an animal, and so on. When we see a new object, we try to look for its characteristics, match them with characteristics of an existing category, and if matching is perfect, we give it the name of that category. For example, while walking on the road, you come across an unfamiliar quadruped of a very small size, with a face like a dog, wagging its tail and barking at strangers. You would no doubt identify it as a dog and probably think that it is of a new breed, which you have never seen before. You would also conclude that it would bite strangers. A concept, thus, is a mental representation of a category. It refers to a class of objects, ideas, or events that share common properties. Why do we need to form concepts? Concept formation helps us in organizing our knowledge so that whenever we need to access our knowledge, we can do it with less time and effort. It is something similar to what we do to organize our things at home. Children who are very systematic and organized put their things such as books, notebooks, pen, pencil, and other accessories in specific places in their cupboard, so that in the morning, they don't have to struggle to find a particular book or the geometry box. In the library too, you have seen books organized as per subject areas and labeled so that you would be able to find them quickly with less effort. Thus, for making our thought process quick and efficient, we form concepts and categorize objects and events. You can find out how children form concepts by doing Activity 8.2. Activity 8.2. Take a piece of cardboard and cut triangles, circles, and squares of 3 different sizes each, small, medium and large. Then color them yellow. Similarly, prepare a second set and color them green and a third set and color them red. Now you have a set of 27 cards varying in shape, size, and color. Ask a child of 5 to 6 years of age to group the similar cards together. If you will try the above activity with a group of small children, you will observe that there are a number of ways in which the child would respond. She or he would pile them up into different groups based on size, all small triangles, squares, and circles together, all medium-sized together, and so on. Shape, all triangles together, all circles together, and so on. Color, all reds together, all yellows together, and so on. Both size and shape, all small triangles together, all medium triangles together, and so on. Size, shape and color, all small circles of red color together, all medium circles of yellow color together, and so on. You have already learned about concept learning in Chapter 6, and the use of concepts in human memory in Chapter 7. Concepts usually fall into hierarchies or levels of understanding. The levels are classified as superordinate, the highest level, basic, and intermediate level, and subordinate, the lowest level. While speaking, we mostly use basic level concepts. When a person says, "I saw a dog," a basic level is used. Such a statement is much more likely to be made than, "I saw a 4-legged animal that barks and wags its tail," or, "an animal." The first, subordinate, is far too specific than is needed for conversation, while the second, superordinate, is far too vague to convey the intended message. Children also learn basic level concepts first and then the other levels. Most of the concepts people use in thinking are neither clear nor unambiguous. They are fuzzy. They overlap one another and are often poorly defined. For example, under which category would you put a small stool? Would you put it under the category of chair, or under the category of table? The answer to these questions is that we construct a model or prototype. A prototype is the best representative member of the category. Eleanor Rosch argues that in considering how people think about concepts, prototypes are often involved in real life. In prototype matching, people decide whether an item is a member of a category by comparing it with the most typical items of the category. Therefore, in the above example of the stool, you would try to compare it with a standard study chair, if you consider it as the typical example of a chair, and a small study table, if you consider it as the typical example of a table, and then match the properties of the stool with these two concepts. If it matches with a chair, you would put it under the category of chair, otherwise under the category of table. Consider another example, the concept cup. Cups, 1, are concrete objects, 2, are concave, 3, can hold solids and liquids, 4, have handles. What about cups we see in the market, with no handle, with a square shape or unusually big in size? In an experiment, the participants were shown the pictures of cups as in Figure 8.3 and W. Labov asked them, which of these would you describe as the prototype for the concept cup? Participants mostly chose number 5. Interestingly, some participants call number 4 a bowl and number 9 a vase because they were so different. The processes of thinking. So far we have been discussing what we mean by thinking and what is the nature of thinking. We also learned that thinking uses mental images and concepts as the base. Now we will discuss how thinking proceeds in a particular area, problem solving. Problem solving. How do we proceed while repairing a broken cycle, or planning a summer tour or patching up a broken friendship? In some cases, the solution is reached quickly, as in repair of a bicycle based on immediately available cues, whereas others are more complex and require time and effort. Problem solving is thinking that is goal directed. Almost all our day-to-day activities are directed towards a goal. Here it is important to know that problems are not always in the form of obstacles or hurdles that one faces. It could be any simple activity that you perform to reach a defined goal, for example, preparing a quick snack for your friend who has just arrived at your place. In problem solving, there is an initial state, i.e., the problem, and there is an end state, the goal. These two anchors are connected by means of several steps or mental operations. Table 8.1 would clarify your understanding of various steps through which one solves a problem. You can try out the problems given in Activity 8.3 with your friends and observe how they are approaching the problem. You can ask them the steps they follow while solving these problems. Obstacles to solving problems. Two major obstacles to solving a problem are mental set and lack of motivation. Mental set. Mental set is a tendency of a person to solve problems by following already tried mental operations or steps. Prior success with a particular strategy would sometimes help in solving a new problem. However, this tendency also creates a mental rigidity that obstructs the problem solver to think of any new rules or strategies. Thus, while in some situations mental set can enhance the quality and speed of problem solving, in other situations it hinders problem solving. You might have experienced this while solving mathematical problems. After completing a couple of questions, you form an idea of the steps that are required to solve these questions, and subsequently you go on following the same steps, until a point where you fail. At this point you may experience difficulty in avoiding the already used steps. Those steps would interfere in your thought for new strategies. However, in day-to-day activities we often rely on past experiences with similar or related problems. Like mental set, functional fixedness in problem solving occurs when people fail to solve a problem because they are fixed on a thing's usual function. If you have ever used a hard-bound book to hammer a nail, then you have overcome functional fixedness. Activity 8.3. Problem 1. Anagrams. Rearrange the letters to form a word. You can also construct some similar words. Nagmara. Bolmper. Slevo. Stgnih. Tolusoni. Problem 2. Joining dots. Without lifting your pencil from the paper, connect all 9 dots by drawing 4 straight lines. Problem 3. Try out the water in 3 bottles activity with your friend. There are 3 bottles, A, B, and C. Bottle A can hold 21 milliliters, B can hold 127 milliliters, and C can hold 3 milliliters. The task for your friend is to get 100 milliliters of water with the help of these 3 bottles. There are 6 more problems like this. These 7 problems are given below. Problems. The required. The capacity of the quantity. Bottles in ml. A, B, C. 1. 100. 21. 127. 3. 2. 99. 14. 163. 25. 3. 5. 18. 43. 10. 4. 21. 9. 42. 6. 5. 31. 20. 59. 4. 6. 20. 23. 49. 3. 7. 25. 28. 76. 3. Answers are given at the end of the chapter. Lack of motivation. People might be great at solving problems, but all their skills and talents are of no use if they are not motivated. Sometimes people give up easily when they encounter a problem or failure in implementing the first step. Therefore, there is a need to persist in their effort to find a solution. Reasoning. If you find a person desperately running on the railway platform, you could infer a number of things such as, he is running to catch the train which is about to leave, he wants to see off his friend sitting in the train which is about to leave, he has left his bag in the train and wants to get in before the train leaves the station. To figure out why this person is running, you could use different kinds of reasoning, deductive or inductive. Deductive and inductive reasoning. Since your previous experience indicates that people run on the platform to catch a train, you would conclude that this person is getting late and is running to catch the train. The kind of reasoning that begins with an assumption is called deductive reasoning. Thus, deductive reasoning begins with making a general assumption that you know or believe to be true and then drawing specific conclusion based on this assumption. In other words, it is reasoning from general to particular. Your general assumption is that people run on the railway platform only when they are getting late for the train. The man is running on the platform. Therefore, he is getting late for the train. One mistake that you are making, and generally people do commit such mistakes in deductive reasoning, is that they assume but do not always know if the basic statement or assumption is true. If the base information is not true, i.e., people also run on the platform for other reasons, then your conclusion would be invalid or wrong. Look at the mouse in figure 8.4. Another way to figure out why the man is running on the platform is to use inductive reasoning. Sometimes you would analyze other possible reasons and observe what the man is actually doing and then draw a conclusion about his behavior. Reasoning, that is based on specific facts and observation, is called inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is drawing a general conclusion based on particular observation. In the earlier example, you observed the other person's subsequent action or actions such as entering into the train compartment and returning with a bag. Based on your observation, you would conclude that the person had left his bag in the train. One mistake you would probably make here is jumping to a conclusion without knowing all possible facts. From the above discussion, we can conclude that reasoning is the process of gathering and analyzing information to arrive at conclusions. In this sense, reasoning is also a form of problem solving. The goal is to determine what conclusion can be drawn from certain given information. Most cases of scientific reasoning are inductive in nature. Scientists and even lay persons consider a number of instances and try to determine what general rule covers them all. Think of yourself using your knowledge of problem-solving steps discussed earlier in planning for a play, or conducting a project. Your inductive reasoning is being applied here. Analogy is another form of reasoning which involves four parts: A is to B is C is to D, with the relation between the first two parts being the same as the relation between the last two. For example, water is to fish as air is to human, white is to snow as black is to coal. Analogies can be helpful in solving problems. They help us in identifying and visualizing the salient attributes of an object or event, which would otherwise go unnoticed. Decision making. Inductive and deductive reasoning allow us to make judgments. In judgment, we draw conclusions, form opinions, evaluate events, objects, based on knowledge and available evidences. Consider this example: the man is very talkative, likes to mix with people, can convince others with ease, he would be most suitable for a salesperson's job. Our judgment of this person is based on the specific characteristics of an expert salesperson. Here we will discuss how we make decisions and judgments. Sometimes judgments are automatic and require no conscious effort by the person and occur as a matter of habit, for example, applying brakes on seeing the red light. However, evaluating a novel or a literary text requires reference to your past knowledge and experience. Judging the beauty of a painting would involve your personal preferences. Thus, our judgments are not independent of our beliefs and attitudes. We also make changes in our judgments based on newly acquired information. Consider this example. A new teacher joins the school. Students make on-the-spot judgment of the teacher as being very strict. However, in subsequent classes, they closely interact with the teacher and make changes in their evaluation. Now they judge the teacher to be extremely student-friendly. Many of the problems you solve each day require you to make decisions. What to wear for the party? What to eat for dinner? What to say to your friend? The answer to all these lies in picking or choosing one of several choices. In decision making, we sometimes choose among options based on choices of personal significance. Judgment and decision making are interrelated processes. In decision making, the problem before us is to choose among alternatives by evaluating the cost and benefit associated with each alternative. For example, when you have the option to choose between psychology and economics as subjects in Class 11, your decision would be based upon your interest, future prospects, availability of books, efficiency of teachers, etc. You could evaluate them by talking to seniors and faculty members and attending a few classes, etc. Decision making differs from other types of problem solving. In decision making, we already know the various solutions or choices and one has to be selected. Suppose your friend is a very good player of badminton. She or he is getting an opportunity to play at the state level. At the same time, the final examination is approaching and she or he needs to study hard for it. She or he will have to choose between two options, practicing for badminton or studying for the final examination. In this situation, his decision will be based upon evaluation of all possible outcomes. You would observe that people differ in their priorities and therefore their decisions will differ. In real-life situations, we take quick decisions and therefore, it is not possible always to evaluate every situation thoroughly and exhaustively. Nature and process of creative thinking. You might have wondered at times how someone for the first time thought of acts like planting a seed, or devising a wheel, or decorating the walls of caves with drawings, etc. Perhaps not satisfied with the old ways of carrying out day-to-day activities, such persons thought of something original. There are countless others whose creativity has led to the present-day scientific and technological progress that we now enjoy. Music, painting, poetry, and other forms of art that give us pleasure and joy are all products of creative thinking. You might have heard about A.D. Carvey, a botanist from our country, who got the UK's Top Energy Award for devising a smokeless chula. He converted dry, useless sugarcane leaves into clean fuel. You might have also heard of Class 11 student Ashish Panwar, who won a bronze medal for assembling a 5-feet-tall robot at the first International Robotics Olympiad held at Glasgow. These are only a few examples of creativity. Try to think of some other examples of creativity in different fields. It is important to remember that creative thinking is not always expressed in extraordinary work. One does not have to be a scientist or an artist to be a creative thinker. Everyone has the potential to be creative. Creative thinking can be applied in almost any area of human activity at different levels. It could be reflected in activities like writing, teaching, cooking, enacting roles, storytelling, conversation, dialogues, asking questions, playing games, trying to solve day-to-day problems, organizing activities, helping others resolve conflicts, and so on. This concept of everyday creativity, which is reflected in one's way of perceiving thinking and problem solving, is different from the special talent creativity seen in outstanding creative achievements. Nature of creative thinking. Creative thinking is distinguished from other types of thinking by the fact that it involves the production of novel and original ideas or solutions to problems. Sometimes, creative thinking is understood just as a new way of thinking or thinking differently. However, it is important to know that, besides novelty, originality is also an important characteristic of creative thinking. Every year, new models of household appliances, tape recorders, cars, scooters, and television sets produced may not be original unless unique features are added to these products. Creative thinking thus refers to originality and uniqueness of ideas or solutions that did not previously exist. Creative thinking is also generally characterized by what Bruner calls affective surprise. If the product or idea is unusual, the response of most who experience it is one of instant surprise or of being startled. Another important criterion that characterizes creative thinking is its appropriateness in a particular context. Simply thinking of being different without any purpose, doing things in one's own ways, being nonconformist, indulging in fantasy without any purpose or coming out with a bizarre idea, is at times mistaken for creative thinking. Researchers tend to agree that thinking is said to be creative when it is reality-oriented, appropriate, constructive, and socially desirable. J.P. Guilford, a pioneer in creativity research, proposed two types of thinking, convergent and divergent. Convergent thinking refers to thinking that is required to solve problems which have only one correct answer. The mind converges to the correct solution. To illustrate, look at the question given below. It is based on a number series, where you have to find the next number. Only one right answer is expected. Q 3, 6, 9. What will come next? Ans 12. Now you try to think of certain questions for which there is no one right answer but many answers. A few such questions are given below. What are the various uses of cloth? What improvements will you suggest in a chair so that it becomes more comfortable and aesthetically pleasing? What will happen if examinations are abolished in schools? Answers to the above questions require divergent thinking, which is an open-ended thinking where the individual can think of different answers to the questions or problems in terms of his experiences. Such kind of thinking helps in producing novel and original ideas. Divergent thinking abilities generally include fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. Fluency is the ability to produce many ideas for a given task or a problem. The more ideas a person produces, the higher his fluency ability. For example, more the number of uses of a paper cup, more would be the fluency. Flexibility indicates variety in thinking. It may be thinking of different uses of an object, or different interpretation of a picture, story, or different ways of solving a problem. In case of uses of a paper cup, for example, one may give an idea to use it as a container or to draw a circle, etc. Originality is the ability to produce ideas that are rare or unusual by seeing new relationships, combining old ideas with new ones, looking at things from different perspectives, etc. Research has shown that fluency and flexibility are the necessary conditions for originality. The more and varied ideas one produces, the greater the likelihood of original ideas. Elaboration is the ability that enables a person to go into details and work out implications of new ideas. Divergent thinking abilities facilitate generation of a variety of ideas which may not seem to be related. For example, what are the common ideas for enhancing food production? The likely answers would be related to quality of seeds, fertilizers, irrigation, and so on. If someone thinks of cultivation in a desert for extracting protein from weeds, it would be a remote idea. The association here is between food production and desert, or weeds. Ordinarily, we do not associate these together. But, if we let our mind free to seek new and remote associations, a number of combination of ideas may arise out of which one or two may turn out to be original. You must remember that both convergent and divergent thinking are important for creative thinking. Divergent thinking is essential in generating a wide range of ideas. Convergent thinking is important to identify the most useful or appropriate idea. Activity 8.4. Frame 5 different kinds of questions requiring divergent thinking on issues and problems related to traffic management, pollution, corruption, illiteracy, poverty. Share and discuss in the class. Process of creative thinking. In recent years, more and more attention has been given to the way the human mind operates. Research has made it clear that thinking of new and unusual ideas involve more than a flash of insight. There are stages before and after the new ideas come. The starting point in creative process is the need to think or bring out something new which initiates the effort. Not everyone experiences this need, as one can be happy and contented in carrying out routine work. The need for search of new ideas and solutions arises from sensing problems and gaps in information. The process of creative thinking begins with the preparation stage that requires one to understand the task or problem in hand, analyze the problem, and become aware of the background facts and related information. The process evokes curiosity and excitement to think more and more in different directions. The person tries to look at the task or problem from different angles and viewpoints. Here, divergent thinking abilities discussed earlier play their role to help one extend in new directions. Coming back to the process, when the person is trying to generate alternative ideas and trying to view the problem or task from an unusual perspective, there may be a feeling of getting stuck. One may even get disgusted with failure and may leave the problem or the task for some time. This is the stage of incubation. Research shows that creative ideas may not occur immediately during incubation when the individual is not consciously thinking about the problem but seeking relaxation from conscious effort. They may occur or strike when a person is doing something else, for example, going to sleep, waking up, taking a bath, or just walking along. Followed by incubation is the stage of illumination, the aha, or I have found it experience, the moment we normally associate with the emergence of creative ideas. There usually is a feeling of excitement, even satisfaction, of having found a creative idea. Last is the stage of verification when the worth or appropriateness of ideas or solutions are tested and judged. Here, convergent thinking plays its role in selecting the appropriate idea or solution that works. Developing creative thinking. As discussed in the previous section, you may recall that the potential for creative thinking is in all of us. It is not limited to a few talented artists or scientists or to a chosen few. The expression of creative thinking may vary from individual to individual. Although hereditary factors are important in determining the extent to which one can be creative, environmental factors facilitate or hamper the development of creative thinking abilities. Research in different countries including India has shown a slump in the level of creative thinking of school children at different stages due to environmental factors. On the other hand, research also indicates that children from lower socioeconomic groups, ethnic and minority groups have substantial untapped creativity and that they are creative in many different ways. Research has also shown that all of us can make better use of our abilities for creative thinking through practice and training. We can become more imaginative, flexible, and original in solving day-to-day problems creatively and effectively. Development of creative thinking is important for one's personal growth and fulfillment. Barriers to creative thinking. The first step in developing creative thinking is to identify inhibiting factors that impede creative expression and then make conscious attempts to overcome the same. As we are discussing, you may analyze how you approach your tasks and problems. There are blocks to creative thinking which can be categorized as habitual, perceptual, motivational, emotional, and cultural. Although much habitual learning is necessary for smooth and efficient functioning within the daily routine, the tendency to be overpowered by habits, particularly in one's ways of thinking, can be detrimental to creative expression. We become so used to thinking and perceiving things in a familiar way that it becomes difficult to think in novel ways. It may be related to our tendency to quickly jump to conclusions, not to see problems from fresh perspectives, be satisfied with routine patterns of doing things, or resist to overcome preconceived viewpoints, and not to change immediate judgment, etc. The perceptual blocks prevent us from being open to novel and original ideas. Try to recall the joining dot problem in Activity 8.3, where you were required to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines going through each dot only once without lifting the pencil or pen from the paper. The solution to the problem lies in going beyond the boundaries. We assume that boundaries exist whereas they did not. Many would attempt to solve the problem by staying in the square that the 9 dots form. There is nothing in the directions to do this. The joining dots problem is indicative of the boundaries and the limitations that are assumed or self-imposed. Motivational and emotional blocks also interfere with creative thinking, which show that creative thinking is not merely a cognitive process. Lack of motivation, fear of failure, fear of being different, fear of ridicule or rejection, poor self-concept, negativism, etc., may hamper creative thinking. For example, some people may not be motivated enough to extend themselves and make extra efforts. A person may find that she or he cannot do it further, may leave the problem in between, or may accept the intermediate idea as the final idea. Further, some people, for example, have negative assumptions about themselves. They feel that they are not capable of doing some tasks. You may be surprised to know that Thomas Alva Edison, the inventor of the bulb, took years of experimentation with hundreds of failures before he produced the first bulb. Cultural barriers are related to excessive adherence to traditions, expectations, conformity pressures, and stereotypes. Conformity to some extent is essential for social existence, but excessive conformity to traditions, rituals, and procedures are likely To block creative thinking. Cultural blocks arise due to the fear of being different, the tendency to maintain status quo, willingness to accept mediocrity, preservation of personal security, social pressure, overdependence on others, etc. The fact that everyone has the potential to be creative and that one can differ in one's expression of creative thinking requires that we all tap our creative potential and remove the barriers as discussed above. Activity 8.5. Ponder over some statements that we often use and which may prevent or aid the emergence of those creative ideas. List those which may block new ideas like "this is not logical," "time is too short to think anymore," "it would not work," etc. And positive statements like "is there any other way, what else," etc. Strategies for creative thinking. Research on characteristics of creative people has revealed that there are certain attitudes, dispositions, and skills which facilitate creative thinking. Here are some strategies to help you enhance your creative thinking abilities and skills. Become more aware and sensitive to be able to notice and respond to feelings, sights, sounds, textures around you. Spot problems, missing information, anomalies, gaps, deficiencies, and so on. Try to notice contradictions and incompleteness in situations that others may not do. For this, cultivate the habit of wider reading, exposure to a variety of information, and develop the art of asking questions, pondering over the mysteries of situations and objects. Generate as many ideas, responses, solutions or suggestions on a given task or situation to increase your flow of thoughts. Try deliberately to look for multiple angles of a task and situation to increase flexibility in your thinking. It could be, for example, thinking of alternative arrangements of furniture in a room to generate more space, different ways of conversing with people, looking for costs and benefits of a course of study or career, looking for ways of dealing with an angry friend, helping others, etc. Osborne's brainstorming technique can be used to increase fluency and flexibility of ideas to open-ended situations. Brainstorming is based on the principle that producing ideas should be kept separate from the evaluation of their worth. The basic assumption is to let the minds think freely, and the tendency to put judgment on the worth of ideas may be postponed, i.e., imagination should be given priority over judgment till all the ideas are exhausted. This helps in increasing the fluency of ideas and piling up alternatives. Brainstorming can be practiced by playing brainstorming games with family members and friends, keeping its principles in mind. Use of checklists and questions often provide a new twist for ideas like, what other changes? What else? In how many ways could it be done? What could be the other uses of this object? And so on. Originality can be developed by practicing fluency, flexibility, habit of associative thinking, exploring linkages, and fusing distinct or remote ideas. A creative thinker, it is said, may not evolve new ideas but evolve new combination of ideas. It is the chain of thoughts and cross-fertilization of ideas that may bring out something new. The idea of the rocking chair has come from the combination of chair and seesaw. Practice making unusual and unexpected associations using analogies. Sometimes finding original ideas, solutions requires a dramatic shift of focus which can be facilitated by asking oneself, what is the opposite of the commonplace or usual solution to the problem? Allow conflicting thoughts to coexist. Looking for solutions opposite to the obvious may lead to original solutions. Engage yourself more frequently in activities which require use of imagination and original thinking rather than routine. Work according to your interest and hobbies. It may be decorating the house, improvising or redesigning of old objects, making use of waste products in multiple ways, completing incomplete ideas in unique ways, giving new twists to stories or poems, developing riddles, puzzles, solving mysteries, and so on. Never accept the first idea or solution. Many ideas die because we reject them thinking that the idea might be a silly idea. You have to first generate a number of possible ideas or solutions, then select the best from among them. Get a feedback on the solutions you decide on from others who are less personally involved in the task. Try to think of what solutions someone else may offer for your problems. Give your ideas the chance to incubate. allowing time for incubation between production of ideas and the stage of evaluation of ideas, may bring in the aha experience. Sometimes ideas cluster like branches of a tree. It is useful to diagram your thinking so that you can follow each possible branch to its completion. Resist the temptation for immediate reward and success and cope with the frustration and failure. Encourage self-evaluation. Develop independent thinking in making judgments, figuring out things without any help or resources. Visualize causes and consequences and think ahead, predicting things that have never happened, like, suppose the time starts moving backwards, what would happen, if we had no zero, etc. Be aware of your own defenses concerning the problem. When we feel threatened by a problem, we are less likely to think of creative ideas. Last but not the least, be self-confident and positive. Never undermine your creative potential. Experience the joy of your creation. Thought and language. Till now, we have discussed the nature and meaning of thinking and how thinking is based on images and concepts. We have also discussed the various processes of thought. Throughout the discussion, did you feel that words or language are essential to express what we think? This section examines the relationship between language and thought, that language determines thought, that thought determines language, and that thought and language have different origins. Let us examine these three viewpoints in some detail. Language is determinant of thought. In Hindi and other Indian languages, we use a number of different words for various kinship relationships. We have different terms for mother's brother, father's elder brother, father's younger brother, mother's sister's husband, father's sister's husband, and so on. An English person uses just one word uncle to describe all these kinship relationships. In the English language, there are dozens of words for colors, whereas some tribal languages have only 2 to 4 color terms. Do such differences matter for how we think? Does an Indian child find it easier to think about and differentiate between various kinship relationships compared to her English-speaking counterpart? Does our thinking process depend on how we describe it in our language? Benjamin Lee Whorf was of the view that language determines the contents of thought. This view is known as linguistic relativity hypothesis. In its strong version, this hypothesis holds what and how individuals can possibly think is determined by the language and linguistic categories they use, linguistic determinism. Experimental evidence, however, maintains that it is possible to have the same level or quality of thoughts in all languages depending upon the availability of linguistic categories and structures. Some thoughts may be easier in one language compared to another. Thought is determinant of language. The noted Swiss psychologist, Jean Piaget, believed that thought not only determines language, but also precedes it. Piaget argued that children form an internal representation of the world through thinking. For example, when children see something and later copy it, a process called imitation, thinking does take place, which does not involve language. A child's observation of others' behavior and imitation of the same behavior, no doubt involves thinking but not language. Language is just one of the vehicles of thinking. As actions become internalized, language may affect children's range of symbolic thinking but is not necessary for the origins of thought. Piaget believed that though language can be taught to children, understanding of the words require knowledge of the underlying concepts, i.e., thinking. Thus, thought is basic, and necessary if language is to be understood. Different origins of language and thought. The Russian psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, argued that thoughts and language develop in a child separately until about 2 years of age, when they merge. Before 2 years, thought is preverbal and is experienced more in action, Piaget's sensory motor stage. The child's utterances are more automatic reflexes, crying when uncomfortable, than thought-based. Around 2 years of age, the child expresses thought verbally and his speech reflects rationality. Now children are able to manipulate thoughts using soundless speech. He believed that during this period the development of language and thinking become interdependent. The development of conceptual thinking depends upon the quality of inner speech and vice versa. Thought is used without language when the vehicle of thinking is nonverbal, such as visual or movement related. Language is used without thought when expressing feelings or exchanging pleasantries, for example, good morning. How are you? Very well, I am fine. When the two functions overlap, they can be used together to produce verbal thought and rational speech. Development of language and language use. Meaning and nature of language. In the previous section, we discussed the relationship between language and thought. In this section, we will examine how human beings acquire and use language in different age groups. Think for a moment, what would have happened if you did not have a language to express whatever you wanted to say? In the absence of language, you will not be able to communicate your ideas and feelings, nor will you have the opportunity to know or have access to what others think and feel. As a child, when you first started saying, ma, 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 it not only gave you tremendous boost to continue repeating this activity but also was a great moment of joy for your parents and other caregivers. Slowly you learned to say, ma, and papa, and sometime later combined two or more words to communicate your needs, feelings, and thoughts. You learned words appropriate for situations and also learned the rules of putting these words in sentences. Initially you learned to communicate in the language being used at home, usually the mother tongue, went to school and learned the formal language of instruction. In many cases this language is different from the mother tongue, and were